So we've talked about the Black Dahlia murder, which happened in 1947. We've introduced you to the gifted but sadistically perverted Dr. George Hodel, who collected women like they were trophies and secretly fantasized about violent eroticism. And then we focused our attentions on Caio, who was really just one of the many girls on the side that Dr. Hodel had throughout most of his life. But now, there's even one more person that we're going to add into this tangled web of drama that we've been weaving. And his name is Steve. Just Steve for now. And as we stated earlier about Caio, who really seemed to enjoy this game of fooling others about her real date of birth, in her life, she married 6 different men, always 15 to 25 years younger than herself. Steve was husband number 5 in this list. And Steve, by the way of a forged birth certificate from Caio, was led to believe that his new wife was only 28 years old in the year 1962 when they got married. He was 20. And the truth about her was that she was actually 42 when they tied the knot. She said that she was 28, and he believed her. I mean, look at the photo of her. It's really kind of hard to blame the guy for being fooled. So that's what brings us here, finally. 8447 Utica Drive in Laurel Canyon. After Steve and Caio got married, they bought this property in 1963. At that time, Caio was a local piano teacher, and she was also a part-time actress who got bit parts in actually some pretty big movie productions, such as Cecil B. DeMille's The 10 Commandments. This is Caio, here in this photo, with Yul Brynner and Charlton Heston in that movie. Steve worked for minimum wage as an orderly in a hospital in Los Angeles. But at the behest of his new wife, he was encouraged to seek employment as a police officer with the LAPD because she had read in the papers that they were hiring, and that job paid significantly more than the one that he currently had. Now, this wasn't anything that he had ever really planned for in his life, but she was relentless. So Steve applied, and Steve got the job with the LAPD, becoming an entry-level patrol officer. And that was a position that he would hold for about 6 years before he was promoted to detective in the Hollywood division. Are you starting to see where we're about to go with this? But unfortunately, this marriage, which again was number 5 for Caio, number 1 for Steve, didn't last very long. In fact, it was only 3 years, and then they split. Now, as part of the divorce proceedings, Caio kept this house. Steve just moved on to another part of Los Angeles, and they basically fell out of contact forever from that point. Steve, after many long years, and well after his promotion to LAPD detective in Hollywood, now had the experience and the clout to do something officially that he had been thinking about for a very long time in his life. He decided that he wanted to reopen and be allowed to investigate a long, cold murder case that had been unsolved and dropped for decades. What was it? You guessed it. It was the Black Dahlia murder. And only now, I'm about to throw you a huge freaking curveball. Did I ever happen to mention to you what Steve's last name was? No, I didn't. Detective Steve was actually Detective Stephen Hodel. Yep, I said it. Stephen Hodel, the son of Dr. George Hodel. Stephen was born in 1941. Ooh, hold on a minute. Wait. Hold up. Was his ex-wife, Kayo, also his mother? Thankfully, no. His mother's name was Dorothy Harvey, who had been married at one time to the legendary Hollywood director John Huston, known for The Maltese Falcon, The African Queen, The Misfits, etc., until she was stolen away by his debonair and charming father, Dr. George Hodel. So what's happening now is that Detective Stephen Hodel, who has long suspected that his father had been doing some really shady and possibly even unspeakable things in his life, he is now investigating his own father, who died in 1999 at the age of 91. Now, the time frame that we're currently in now is about 2002, and just a few years after Hodel Sr. has finally passed away. Stephen at this point is about 62 and is close to retirement. He's already retired from the LAPD, but now he's a private detective. So he starts digging. He gets access to all of the writings and all of the photographs and personal belongings of his father from his mother that until that time had been locked away and unavailable to him or to anybody else. He starts to find things. He starts making connections that hadn't ever been made before. And being a trained detective, he knew exactly what to look for. But it turns out that he began to find other things that he was not at all expecting to find. His investigation took on an entirely different perspective when he began finding photographs within his father's diaries and secret papers of a mysterious young woman who appeared to be of a mixed European-Japanese heritage. Wow. Okay, now we're really coming full circle with this, so stay with me, we're almost there. As he began to find these photos, which were very few in number, but that always had dates on the back of them, but no names, he immediately began to wonder who this woman was and why she looked so much like his ex-wife, whom he hadn't had any contact with for over 35 years. That wonder quickly went from, damn, this woman looks almost exactly like my ex-wife, to, holy shit, that is my ex-wife, and what in the absolute hell is she doing in a photograph with my father in the 1940s at an age of about 15 years before she was even supposed to have been born? He was told by Kayo that she was born in 1935. She was actually born in August of 1920 in Boston, Massachusetts, and her real name is Amilda Kayoko Tachibana. So, poor Steve, now utterly confused, finally confronts his own mother about these revelations and just flat out demands to know if these photos were really photos of Kayo. She reluctantly answered him in the affirmative, which should make anyone out there wonder why this vital information was not provided to this young man at the age of 20 at the time that he was about to get married to his father's former mistress. I can't answer that either. So now he knows. And here's the other kicker. As it turns out, Kayo absolutely knew who Stephen Hodel was when she met him at a Hollywood party in 1961 when he was 19 years old. Don't forget, Kayo was around with George Hodel when Stephen was born in 1941. So she knew him as a baby, and he had no idea who she was at that time. They met, and of course, also had no idea that she was actually 15 years older than what she said she was. And she even had a fake birth certificate to back up her claims. Now, to jump back to the reasons why the younger Hodel began investigating the older Dr. Hodel, I don't know exactly why Stephen had a lifelong hunch that his own father may have been not only the murderer of Elizabeth Short, aka the Black Dahlia, but also, very possibly, a repeat serial killer who had fled the country to the Philippines in 1950, only to secretly return over the years and kill others. Stephen Hodel has written a book about his 20 years of investigations into his father, and I'll let you do that research on your own if you want to know his theories and his final conclusions. But just a couple of juicy but horrifying little nuggets of information for you. Stephen Hodel, in his book, has concluded that his own father killed Elizabeth Short in 1947 at the very house that he lived in as a boy in Los Feliz, and that he killed her, possibly on accident, after sadistically torturing her during a sexual escapade. And then, with the skills of a trained doctor, cut the woman into 2 equal pieces at the waist, drained out all of her blood, and then transported her body over to South Norton Avenue in Limert Park and left her there in a vacant lot. Now, I said I wasn't going to give you all of those grisly details, but I guess I just kind of did. Okay, now, for the official record, the Black Dahlia murder is still considered unsolved, although it has been revealed that Dr. George Hodel was always considered a suspect in this case, literally right from the very beginning. So, Stephen Hodel's conclusions, while very convincing with new evidence that had never been heard before, are still considered unproven, and the case will possibly always be considered unsolved. Stephen Hodel has also put forth the idea that his father George may have even been the Zodiac killer of Northern California, and that is some absolutely crazy stuff. Caio was never part of this investigation, not in the 1940s and also not in the more recent timeline. She was also not available to help Stephen Hodel in his investigation because unfortunately Caio died of cancer in 1978. So do the math. How old was she in reality at the time of her death? She was 58. It does make you wonder, though, what she might have known, being so close to George Hodel for a while. Because according to those secret diaries, Caio may have been pushed away, romantically speaking, from George in 1942, but she was still a frequent house guest at his parties well up until about 1950. That was the year that George fled the country as the authorities and investigators were starting to close in on him. Now, here's the very last thing, and this one is just my own personal opinion. Do you remember just a few short minutes ago when I shared the piece of information with you about Caio being so adamant about her then husband Steve becoming a police officer with the LAPD? Do you remember that? Of course you do. My theory is that Imelda Kayoko Tachibana was a true psychic. And she may have even been not of this world. How do you explain a person who never seems to age? And who knew that at one point in her life, she would marry a man, and through her own efforts, he would become the lead detective who would reopen the Black Dahlia case of 1947. Stay with me. That he would investigate his own father, and in the act of a final sweet revenge from beyond the grave, that she would get the final satisfaction of knowing that her ex-lover, who dumped her at the real age of 22 for another mistress, would have his already tarnished name dragged through the mud once again over 50 years after the fact. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Thank you for indulging me on that one. I realize that was a huge tangent, but I found that fascinating information, and I just really wanted to share it with you. So now, let's get back to why we're actually here, why we came out here, and that was to look at the place where Neil Young lived for about a year back in 1967 to 68. So we're already here, and all of this back here and up on that hill behind me, behind the gate, is all part of the same property. That's the property that Caio Hudell used to own. Neil's old wooden shack is up there somewhere, but unfortunately there's some newer construction that is now in the way of our view, and from right here you can't see that little house up there anymore. So what's to be done about that? I want to see this place just as badly as you do, so here's what I tried to do. Way up there at the top of that ridge is a street called Rugby Place, and I thought that if I could just get up there, well, then I could just look down and see the house. But the problem was that didn't work because that road up there is completely blocked by a private gate. And all the homes up there are the only people who have access behind that gate. So, strike one. Now on an older map, I noticed that there's also a one-lane road that runs right up to the house. Maybe it was like some old pathway or something like that. And it even had a name. It was called Elusive Way. Well, it turned out that it was very elusive because after looking at Google Earth, I noticed that it appears to be gone and completely grown over. Its only connection was a driveway right here. And this is all private property that's back here at the end of this driveway that's just off of Jewett Drive. I also found another promising little path, and it was at the other end of Jewett Drive. But all it did was take me right back down to the other end of this road that we're standing on right now. So, again, no luck. Strike two. Okay, so the third try would have been for me to just go up and ask the current owners nicely if we could go up and take a look for ourselves. But honestly, I just really didn't want to bother them, and plus it seems like they have some really unfriendly dogs up there. So that's not going to work either. So really, about the only thing that we could do at this point would be to fly a drone up there, which is exactly what we did. Wait a minute, just when you thought that we were done here with this spot, we're not. This other house right down here at the street level, which is also part of this same property, and for some reason also looks like it may have been remodeled by a character right out of Tolkien's Middle-earth, also housed another well-known musician at the time that Neil Young was living here. That musician was the drummer of a band that you might be aware of. They were known as the Doors. Yep, Neil Young was neighbors with John Densmore of the Doors for most of 1968. Apparently, John had had to move out of the house over on Lookout Mountain, the one that he shared with bandmate Robbie Krieger, because John at the time had a serious live-in girlfriend, and the other house was getting just a little bit too small for all of them at the same time. So John came to live here for a while. So are we done now? No, almost. After John Dinsmore moved out, I have some credible information that several years later, long after John was gone from here, another tenant was a young man who later became the most commercially successful magician in the history of professional magic. That was David Copperfield. And this may also help to explain why this house appears to have been inhabited by Gandalf the Grey. Now we're done. Okay, we're going to come down off of this hill and we're going to head back down into the Kirkwood Bowl area. Here we are at the corner of Weepaway and Ridpath. We're going to turn to the west and head right this way towards a cluster of 3 homes. One of them has a connection to singer-songwriter Jackson Browne. So we're going to take a look at that one first. We're going to be at 8504 Ridpath, just right up here. Now, originally this house belonged to the publicist named Billy James. He worked for Elektra Records, Columbia Records, RCA Records, most famous actually for working very closely with Bob Dylan. Now, as you're about to see here in just a moment, this house is actually now the consulate of Chile. But for a very brief time, in 1968, when Jackson Browne was probably only about 19 years old, he lived here for just a few months and must have been working closely with Billy James at that time. This was before Jackson Browne's debut album came out in 1972. And at this time, he basically was just acting as a songwriter for some pretty big names like the Eagles and Linda Ronstadt. So this next one should be relatively easy since it's directly right next door. So here we have the former home of record executive Barry Friedman, who was the manager of Buffalo Springfield in its very earliest days. He was described as somewhat of an odd and an eccentric fellow, and he actually, for some strange reason, later in his life changed his name to Fraser Mohawk. Well, he was living here with Stephen Stills to begin with, and then the band Buffalo Springfield basically just all sort of moved in with him, and they used this house to party and to practice, to write songs. Got themselves into quite a bit of trouble with the law, apparently. Some of it was just loud music, and some of it was actually drug-related. And that was one of the problems that the band Buffalo Springfield encountered during their 2 years of brief existence, was that because some of them were Canadian citizens, they got deported on a number of occasions because of drug-related charges. And unfortunately, it was partly due to incidents such as these that led to the eventual demise of the band in 1968 after they had recorded 3 albums together. So let's just keep walking this way on Ridpath, because just another 2 doors down is going to be the last house on our list for today. And this one is the former home of record producer Paul Rothchild. And if you're a Doors fan, you should recognize that name because he's the one who produced the first 5 Doors albums. But notoriously not the 6th album, which of course was L.A. Woman. And it's rumored that during the early recording sessions of that album, he got up and walked out of the studio in a huff because, as the quote goes, he said to them, "The music that you're writing now sounds like cocktail jazz music." Some people are under the impression that he was referring to the song Riders on the Storm, but according to Rothchild himself, he actually claims it was not the song Riders on the Storm he had an issue with. It was the song Love Her Madly. I need one of these so bad right now. Okay, so by the way, I want to share another interesting photo with you that I found, and I apologize that it's not really great quality, but what we have here is a picture of Neil Young, and he's sitting here with his former landlord, Kayo. And this is from Time magazine article in 1969. And she is described here as a young, half-Japanese astrologer who generally works with folk singers and pop stars. And 1969, Kayo would have been 49 years old. And I have a feeling that Neil probably thinks she's 29. Hey everybody, I want to say thanks one more time for sticking around and watching us in episode 3. I want you to come back and join us again for episode 4. We've got some more things in store for you. We're going to go way up into the hills and take a look at a house that has some connections to John Lennon. We're going to see a house that belonged to Roger McGuinn of the Byrds. We're also going to see a house that used to be connected to another member of the Byrds, and it's just not there anymore. You'll have to come and join us to find out what happened. Once again, big thank you. This is Billy with Wolf River Music Television. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you'll always know when new videos are coming out. Hope to see you again. Have a great day.